Welcome to the deep dive.
Okay, so we're jumping straight into something that feels a bit like a puzzle today. If Islam literally means submission, giving yourself over to God's will,
Yeah.
how does that square with the idea that you also have to use your brain? Use logic, sense, reason. It kind of feels like you'd have to pick one, right? Either it's faith or it's thinking.
Yeah, that's exactly the apparent paradox we want to unpack. It seems like a contradiction, but we're diving into this really interesting analysis called submission, sense, and reason.
Hmm.
And its big reveal, maybe the quote-unquote secret, is that these two things, submission and reason, they aren't fighting each other. Actually, the source argues they work hand in hand. Logic isn't just like permitted, it's essential. It's the tool you need for real submission. So our mission today is to figure out exactly how that connection works, how reason actually ends up supporting faith. Okay, so it's not just that they can exist side by side. It's more that one actually strengthens the other. Let's start right at the foundation then. The idea of submission, it implies following rules, divine rules. How do we get from there to saying those rules are based purely on sense and reason? How does that connection get made?
Well, it's fascinating how the source tackles this. It goes straight to the Qur'an. And it doesn't frame it as some, mysterious book of orders. It calls it the ultimate blueprint.
A blueprint, for how reality works.
Exactly. A guide that's presented as perfectly clear, totally logical, and completely in sync with reality itself.
Okay, that makes sense. A blueprint implies a designer, an intelligence behind it. And if you think about the universe, physics, biology, it all runs on these incredibly precise logical systems. So why would the spiritual guidance from the same source be any different? Why would that part be illogical?
Precisely. You've hit it. The source connects this idea directly to God's wisdom. If God is understood as all-wise, all-knowing, the architect, basically, then anything he commands, any rule he sets, must inherently make sense. It has to align with the best possible design.
Yeah.
Everything is done for a clear reason, a purpose. And that's where our human reason comes in. We're supposed to see that logical consistency. We observe that the rules are actually designed to lead to good functional outcomes. Realizing that, well, that's a rational process. It's the logical endpoint of observing a perfect design.
I see. So the intellectual work is recognizing that connection. Because the source of the command is perfectly wise, the command itself must be perfectly logical and purposeful. It's about verifying that the system works as intended.
Exactly. It is. And the messages in the Qur'an, about life, death, how to live righteously, they're specifically meant to click with our logic and our feelings, too. They're not meant to be things you just accept without thinking. The analysis points out that the rules don't feel contradictory because they actually reinforce what our own sense and reason tell us is, well, right. It kind of moves past being a logical puzzle and becomes a reinforcement of rationality.
Okay, that makes sense. That leads us nicely into the next big question, doesn't it? How do we get from just seeing this logic in the world or in the text to actually making that active choice? The choice to submit. The source talks about two paths here, right? Internal and external proof. These are supposed to bridge that gap.
That's right. Two paths that essentially arrive at the same conclusion. They confirm the same truth. This ensures that belief isn't just based on abstract logic, but also on observable facts and that deep personal feeling. Conviction.
All right, let's take the internal proof first. The source calls it intuition. Now, when you talk about that deep feeling, that sense there's more to life than what we see, that feeling of eternity, honestly, that sounds a bit fuzzy, like an emotional appeal, maybe not solid proof. How does the source argue that that feeling is logical proof?
That's a fair question. It does sound a bit abstract. But the source flips it around. It asks, look, we're finite beings, right? Limited physical experience.
Yeah.
So how on earth could we even conceive of eternity? How could we imagine something so far beyond our direct experience? The analysis suggests that this feeling, this sort of innate sense of something bigger, this desire for permanence, it must be like an echo or an imprint left by eternity itself. So the very fact that we can imagine eternity, that the concept exists in our minds, that becomes the internal logical evidence that eternity is real.
Okay. So it turns intuition from just a feeling into a kind of internal cognitive beta point, evidence from within. And then the external proof is there to back it up with things we can actually see and measure.
Exactly. That's the amazing order in God's creation part. So our reason looks at the universe, physics, maths, the incredible complexity of ecosystems, all that intricate organization. When you combine that observable order with the deep inner feeling we just talked about, well, belief in a designer becomes almost unavoidable. It's presented as the most logical conclusion, given all the evidence, internal and external, It becomes harder not to believe.
So the path uses sense and reason, first observing the world, feeling that intuition and that process leads naturally towards submission.
Yes, and it's really interesting how the source then defines submission in that context. It's not presented as just, blind obedience.
Yeah.
Far from it. It's defined as willingly and crucially intentionally obeying God, following the commands, avoiding the forbidden things. But that intention, it's rooted in the rational understanding we just discussed. The understanding that God's rules are there for a reason, for the actual measurable good of people in society. So submitting becomes a rational choice, an act aimed at improving yourself and the community.
That really changes the perspective. The rules aren't arbitrary tests, they're practical tools for helping humans flourish. Okay, if we accept that theory, what does it look like on the ground? What examples does the source give of these logical rules in action? Let's get into section 3, submission in action, the practical side.
Right, this is where it gets really concrete. The source connects the command directly to the benefit. We can start with, say, the 5 daily prayers, Salat. Obviously, it's a spiritual connection. But the source points out the immediate, very practical structures it creates in your life.
Okay, how does praying 5 times a day have logical benefits beyond the spiritual?
Well, think about discipline. It creates this rhythm for your day. 5 fixed points. That naturally builds self-discipline, order, punctuality. It's a constant, gentle structuring of your time and attention, a foundation. And the source gets even more specific. It mentions wudu, the washing before prayer, ablution.
Ritual washing.
Exactly. It's not just symbolic. It means you're washing up multiple times, every single day. Think about the basic public health logic there. A community where everyone is performing personal hygiene rituals 5 times daily. That's a built-in system for cleanliness, embedded right in the faith.
Wow, okay. That's a clear example. Spiritual command, undeniable physical, logical benefit. Simple hygiene. What about the rules that shape the community more broadly, like the economy?
Yeah, that brings us to zakat, often just called alms tax, but the source digs into the economic logic. It stresses that zakat isn't optional charity for Muslims who meet the criteria. It's mandatory, and it's structured, calculated. It's based on hitting a certain level of wealth that you've held for a year, the nisab. That structure itself points to a mechanism.
Okay, walk me through that mechanism. What's the logic?
Zakat is basically designed to prevent wealth from just sitting there, stagnating, hoarding. By requiring that a specific percentage of surplus wealth gets distributed every year, the system forces that money back into circulation. It keeps the economy moving. Plus, it builds community stability. It creates a direct link of responsibility between those who have more and those who have less. It's like a divinely mandated social safety net, but built on rational economic principles. It's presented as a deliberate design to achieve a very real, very logical social good.
So it's less about pity and more about economic justice, a system to keep society balanced and resilient. Okay, that makes sense. The source also mentions individual things like fasting during Ramadan. What's the logic there besides spiritual self-control?
Right, fasting is definitely a test of spiritual discipline, no question. But the source flat out states it has undeniable health benefits. The logic is partly the physical reset it provides the body. And yes, the self-control needed is itself a practical skill for life. But medically speaking, periods of caloric restriction are increasingly recognized for benefits like metabolic health. So it's a command that pushes for holistic well-being, mind, body, spirit, all through one structured annual practice.
Okay, and this next one feels like the ultimate example, maybe. The Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, that's a huge undertaking, millions of people. What does the analysis say about the logic of commanding something like that?
Hajj is a duty, yeah, but only for those who are actually able to do it physically and financially. That condition itself is logical. But the main benefit highlighted is how it functions as this mandatory global gathering, a conference almost, focused entirely on God. And the real genius, from a purely rational organizational perspective, is the commanded equality.
How so?
Either the simple white cloths everyone wears.
Right, everyone looks the same. It removes status symbols.
Exactly. By divine command, you strip away all the usual markers. Wealth, nationality, job title, education level, even gender distinctions become less pronounced. Hajj forces millions of incredibly diverse people into a state of absolute equality, all focused on the same goal. The source presents it as this amazing real-world demonstration, a logistical model showing that, yes, humanity can unify, that these diverse groups can function together seamlessly, peacefully, under the banner of submission to a higher logical order. It shows the wisdom of the rules made manifest, on a massive scale.
That ties it all together really powerfully, whether it's personal hygiene, economic flow, or global unity. The commands are structured. They produce clear, rational, beneficial results that we can actually see and understand.
Precisely. The source is really clear on this. It doesn't ultimately matter which door you enter through. Maybe you start with submission, with faith, and then you use your reason to see why it all makes sense, why the rules work. Or maybe you start the other way. You start with logic, with observing the world, using your sense and reason, and that investigation leads you logically to submission. Either way, the destination is the same.
So what's the bottom line here? What does this connection mean for us?
The bottom line is that Islam, as presented in this analysis, finds its confirmation because it integrates these three things: sense, reason, and submission. They aren't separate boxes. They're all part of one coherent system. And for you, the listener, especially if you value learning, understanding things deeply, this framework is quite reassuring. It says the rules aren't arbitrary. They serve logical, beneficial purposes. It grounds faith in something verifiable, something that demands your active intellectual participation. It's not asking you to switch your brain off, quite the opposite.
Right. And since the source lays out those two distinct starting points, that inner intuition versus the outer observation, logic, and says both lead to the same place, both confirm submission, we're left with the final thought for you to chew on. Which of those paths do you think creates the more powerful, the more lasting sense of purpose in the long run? Is it starting with that deep internal feeling, that sense of eternity? Or is it starting with the cold, hard, rational evidence you see in the order of creation? Does logic alone provide enough fuel for enduring submission? Or does that inner conviction provide an anchor that reason maybe can't? Something to think about until our next deep dive.